So I really wish that there was some sort of secret to the whole academic game. I was just thinking about this, right? So I can tell you that there is. I was gonna begin this as sort of a motivational thing. Then I thought, no, I want to do something a little bit more practical. What kind of advice that I can give to make your life easier in terms of something practical with with feedback that you get. The whole thing, I'm going to tell you how this whole works, right? The whole academic research thing. So what you do is you dream up an idea. You know, it might be a little tiny idea, and then you try to write up an article on it and get some evidence on this thing, right? So I don't know, some sort of scientific methody kind of thing with getting um, evidence. You can use either sort of the strict scientific method with, hypothesis, or you can talk to people. There's a whole whack of different ways that are socially acceptable. And then you send it off to people. And, sometimes this is people sometimes it's not. It might be through the journal process, which is kind of often the normal way that we do it. And you get this feedback. And this feedback is usually you suck, right? Like that's the general sum of it. When your paper sucks, what you're doing is wrong, and you have to work on it. And I don't think that's actually a good way to think about things on the reviewer side, but that's another story. Um, that's just the general thing is that there is the job of the reviewer to send back just basically this big dump on you. Like that's it. What you're doing is terrible and everything is wrong with it. So most often, you'll get a rejection at that moment, right? So your stuff will be rejected and nobody wants to pay attention to it. So what do you do with that, right? Like that's the thing I wanted to give sort of some sort of practical advice. But I don't think that there is actually practical advice to it. And the reason is that there's so much randomness that's in the system, right? Like some people, if you get the right editor or the right team, so you'll get an editor, sometimes you'll get an editor and or associate editor and an editor that will take a look at it. Plus, a couple of reviewers. It's probably two or three reviewers. It could be four reviewers, but some number of, and they're usually, anonymous-ish, right? Like you don't know who they are, and they're giving you some feedback on the stuff you're doing. And with that team, it could be pulled from any different directions, right? And generally, it is completely negative in terms of the feedback you get. And so, how do you respond to that? I don't think that there is an appropriate way to respond to it ever, right? I don't think that there is actually a secret to whether you work on this thing more, right, and make it better, um, whether it is you just give up on it, whether it is you send it someplace else. There's not really a secret to any of this. And I think that's the message that I want to sort of send to you is that whatever you choose is probably right. And whatever you're doing is probably right. And the key thing is, I think the only thing, right, is to not give up. It's a survivor game at the end of the day of just not giving up on yourself. Um, and it's completely irrational often, right? For me, it's well past the does this make financial sense point of things. I don't know if any of the stuff that I work on is ever going to make a difference in somebody else's life, right? Like no feedback at all in terms of the stuff that I'm working on. Will this actually matter? In the grand scheme of things, I've never had, a sort of a research article that's blowing up and it's got all a bunch of publicity and all this kind of stuff. It's not what typically happens. In fact, you're lucky if you get like one news article. Maybe if you're at some highfalutin school, I'm not going to mention these highfalutin schools, but you all know them. You're going to get extra media attention, um, and you might get a couple of articles written about it. But in general, it's not right. Like you're not going to get any feedback ever. In fact, you're lucky if you have a few people that read this thing. So the entire endeavor is completely non-rational. It doesn't make sense. You talk to most people other than the very successful few, right? You talk to the very successful few and you know them, right? They're the ones that get the fanfare. Everybody talks about them. Everybody sees them. So those folks, remove that from your set, right? From your decision set, which I know it's maybe not appropriate because they're the ones that are getting through. But look at normal people, right? Like normal people doing normal things, whatever that thing is. So one lesson that I learned from sociology, all my sociology courses that I took that actually was worthwhile, is just look at normal people and what normal people are doing. And when you look at them, you realize like, holy crap, um, people do this and they have no feedback. They don't know what the right thing is. The only sort of predictor that we have is a survivor game, and just continuous repeating. But then even still, like there is a lot of people that survive in a career, in an academic career, that you'll never pay attention to. They might be sort of well known within their particular small group, right? Whatever, however you might define that. Maybe it's in their particular academic setting, or maybe it's in their university and people kind of know of them because they've been around for a long time. But there's a ton of people that just get no credit for doing what they're actually doing, right? That's the norm, right? Like that is the majority. I would say that is 80%, 90%. And then there is the 10% or less that actually get some fanfare and attention and all that kind of stuff, which, ultimately that's what we're all trying to seek. Um, but, you know, with that, what are the right answers in terms of responding to feedback that you get? And frankly, there's no right answer. Right, on one side, you might get people that you might think that they're dying on their own sword, right? That saying is they're sort of they have their moral standards of this is what I'm going to do and I'm not going to sort of budge from that. That's one extreme, right? And then they might be dying on their sword, right? They have their particular set ideas and they essentially just don't go anywhere with their particular set of ideas. And then on the other side, you have the sort of pragmatic people that just sort of respond to everything and all the feedback, which is probably more on what I end up doing because I probably respond too much. Um, but on that side, you just kind of like are flipping through things all the time, right? You're just redoing things over and over and over again. And on each side, you might think that they're completely, insane on both sides, right? Like the outside world. And here's the thing, right? The outside world, whoever those are, right? And you have them, whatever those particular outside world people are, um, they're going to tell you whatever you're doing is wrong. So if you do the right thing in your eyes in the one particular way, right? Like you have this sort of predefined things, you're doing everything sort of doing great, and by definition in your head that you're doing everything wonderful, there is going to be people that suggest what you're doing is wrong, right? You might be doing extra sort of different components or different. You're in a certain area. So, for example, you're researching a certain thing, people are going to criticize that, right? They're going to say, well, that's garbage. You give back in terms of service, and they're going to say you're going to do too much service. You you know you are a good teacher. They're going to say you're too good of a teacher, right? And why are you spending so much time on your teaching? Like all of these things, right? You add it all up, and there's no right answer, and it's just everybody sort of judging everybody else. But um, what you need to stand up and you just need to do is say, hey, I'm perfectly fine with who I am. I'm going to continue on the course that I'm going at, and that's okay, right? And I know that's a wishy-washy, garbage answer in terms of practicalness, um, but that's the only answer that I actually know, right? I look at a lot of things, right? Like I look at a garbage paper, for example, and I might think like, man, that's a garbage paper, but it just requires some tweaks and then it would actually be kind of interesting, right? Kind of might turn into something. And then that's where you're just like, hey, I just need to get those tweaks. I just need to get to the point where it's kind of resonating with some people and you're just kind of stumbling along with it, right? And it's not unlike something that you might do in entrepreneurship, for example, where everybody's going to crap on you. And the dynamics are the same way. It's sort of popularity dynamics. Everybody craps on you until one day they're not, right? Like one day you wake up and all of a sudden it just changes, right? And everybody is like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Because everybody crapped on you. Um, and I think that's, you know, that is where you need to sort of just be okay with who you are. I think ultimately that's the message. That's the practical message is no matter what you do, how you do it, people are not going to like it. But you got to stand up and be okay with who you are and walk your walk and let the world adapt around who you are as an individual. Obviously, you want to respond a little bit to the world, right? Like be malleable to the world, being, courteous and all that sort of normal human decency stuff, which is hard to do for a lot of people. But all of those sort of basic things, that's it. That's ultimately it. And you just keep going one day at a time, one step at a time. And that's it. Every single day until I don't know. I don't even know what the end goal is, right? Like that's the funny thing. There is no end goal. It's just you just do it because because that's it. All right, take care. Have a wonderful day.